And so we return and begin again. Welcome to the Invisible Podcast, episode 18, part 2. We are still going page by page, panel by panel, issue by issue, theory by theory, crazy by shit through Grant Morrison's crazy cosmic conspiracy classic, The Invisibles from the 90s. This is part 2 of episode 18, as I just said a second ago. I sort of wanted to apologise for part 1, in which I said an awful lot and yet very little at the same time. And then the computer broke, and it was just a disaster, almost a write-off. But I'm not going to write it off. We're just going to barrel through and do the rest of the issue now in one hopefully quite brief go. I wanted to refocus us on the basic point of this issue. This issue that we're going through, issue 18, which is that, and how it relates to where we are now in 2020, October, which is that King Mob, who we've seen resurgent on the streets of the whole world, but let's go with the West because, things are different everywhere. In terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, the kind of weird Q adjacent and just kind of like other sidey various street movements, protests, and demonstrations, which have become and basically the kind of the ongoing insurgent conflict going on in certain democratic controlled cities in otherwise largely Republican states in the Western USA. These are all things which we could call the resurgence of King Mob, right? Whose power is sovereign. This issue that we're dealing with here literally involves King Mob in the chains of the ruling class being tortured and tormented by linguistic technologies, which may or may not be related to the letter Q through the number 17, that are neutering, interrogating, and controlling and converting King Mob to the ruling class's agenda. Yeah, if you say that Key 17 is Facebook or maybe those hidden WhatsApp groups that are terribly scary, then that's where we are in 2020, right? That's how the resonant magic is relevant and let's even say constructive of where we are now. Okay? That's the important point here. King Mob bound and dissected by the ruling class. That's where we are. Okay? So I got about as far as this: Fighting American, the Wild Wild West, Jack Kirby. Fighting American, I think I got it wrong. Fighting American isn't like a wartime one. He was like early 50s McCarthyite period basically, and he was like a kind of a commie bashing Red Scare type version of Captain America that Simon and Kirby created and indeed retained the publishing rights to. So these publications here by Marvel in the 90s are licensed, they're not owned. And this, so the way that we go from Wild West to McCarthyite America, although rapidly the Fighting American stopped being a commie basher and became a parody of superhero comics through a lens of Red Scare, Red Menace, hyperbole. Regardless of that, the important bit on this advert is, which relates to our current situation. I don't know if you can read it, but it says, "The young men in the golden age of comic books were as bizarre as the characters they created." Now, if we notice that this issue or this arc are the ones that kind of create the bridge between King Mob, the character in the comic, and Grant Morrison, the author of the comic, and their lives beginning to overlap in some interesting ways, then that's why this advert here is part of what we're doing. over the page, we have another advert for the Sandman, like we do every freaking issue. The beginning of the end, the Sandman, the kindly ones. So these are, this is an advert for the hardcover collection of the final Sandman storyline. I haven't read that for a very long time. It's rubbish as far as I can remember. Basically, Mark Hempel, it's a 12 issue storyline, like Dream versus the Furies, the Erinyes, who have kind of got beef with him because of what he did, because of his murdering of his son Orpheus. All of this is resonant and interesting stuff. Don't get me wrong. It's on the symbolic level, it's all fairly meaty, but God above, those 12 issues are a drag. Yeah, poor Mark Hempel, a really interesting idiosyncratic artist, really chained into like a 9-panel grid. Is it 9? Maybe it's a 6-panel grid. But really chained into it for 12 issues of not much happening and a lot of words. Not much, or not unlike part 1 of this here issue. So, worth noting the author here, though. Yeah, like like this is Shakespeare, who cut a deal with in the Sandman, right? Shakespeare cut a deal with Dream to be able, for the gift of being able to write these plays. uh I'm definitely not keen on getting into Stratfordian conspiracies, which I think I've touched on before, but this image, like this very image of Shakespeare, old Bill the Bard, hunched over his writing desk with his books and his candle and his quill, just kind of like scratching out this incredible language onto a page, kind of isolated, with his big authorial boldy brain head here, doing just creating this stuff, that kind of and basically just kind of channeling it from beyond. As pleasing as that myth is, this does connect to this issue in our hand as well, because like it is really important to realize that, like, Grant Morrison, as much as he is like the thing, he's not really the Shakespeare of. Oh, maybe he is. Okay, so these are the aliens, right, who gave Morrison the Invisibles, and this is Morrison. But really, that's a bit of a myth too, right, or a conspiracy theory, if you like, because you know Elizabethan and Jacobean era plays were a group project. Yeah, this comic, and I'm not blaming Morrison for kind of having been pushed to the front of this. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely trying to kind of grab a lot of authorial presence, but there's always a list of many people at the start of each issue who have been responsible for its production, and then you've got to think about the people who work in the comic shops, and you've got to think about the people who work on the adverts, and you've got to think about the people who drive the trucks and the planes that bring the comics to the shops. These are this inscription of the productive process here, that like there is an eerie magic received by a great big brained individual that then just kind of creates these things, which then become podcasts later on, right? Many years later. That ain't it. That's not actually how these things appear in the world. And the kind of the emphasis on lone genius as being only the important and interesting thing in the production, or not lone, but like, man and God, genius being the thing that creates the thing. That's that's mobilized for purposes which are kind of archonic, right? Let's be honest, they're kind of like baddie, out the churchy, bad guy vibes, to say that no, only the white guy with his big brain and his magic connection to God are the things at stake here. We have Odin also, and his who's again and his two ravens, who kind of are the things that bring him this kind of like wisdom from beyond. But who also, if you're looking for like a magical, or if you're looking for like a godhead type figure, not godhead, sorry, but like a god who would be able to facilitate the communication of these ideas from the aliens or God or beyond, and who would be a good god to be able to transform you into the figure in your comic, Odin would be a useful one to have lurking in the corner of the page. Over the page, we're back in the room. We're on page 9, and we've got this brilliant picture of Uluru, Ayers Rock, as it was called when I was young, but don't want that anymore. Central Australia, February '94. So this is February '96 that this comic comes out. Remember, I always forget what year it's meant to be taking place in. I'm fairly sure it's '95. So this isn't very long. This kind of like King Mob's visit to Australia that's depicted here isn't terribly long before he picks up Jack for the first time. Okay, this is not very far before he becomes the very fully formed King Mob that we see in issue 1. So this picture by Jimenez, and remember, I mean Jimenez and Lanning and Co. when I say Jimenez. This picture is fantastic. It's a really, really nicely composed and drafted shot of Uluru. It's really interesting. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do an Australian accent because the last issue was so bad that you guys deserve it. That's Uluru for you, mate. According to the owl fellas, it's the navel of Australia. 3/4 of the bugger's under the ground. It's the biggest single piece of rock on the planet. What's great here is that he says 3/4 of the bugger's under the ground, right? And the perspective on this shot is actually a little bit unusual, but it's great because if we take this as being 1/4 and the 3/4 are underground, so we've got 1/4, 2, 3, 4. Basically, the way that Jimenez stroke Morrison, who may have thumbnailed out this page, I don't know or care, have used all of this like empty field space where King Mob's truck is, and all of this foreground. If you just continue Uluru straight down, that's how big it really is. You know, that's where the underground bit of the tip of the Uluru iceberg that you can't see. That's how big it is, it's quite subtle, but it's a fantastic way of showing you how big Uluru is. Really, like that's comics gold. That's visual art gold there. Really nice page. So this is King Mob in Australia, in Central Australia, February 1994. He's on his journey of discovery. I'll be generous for a minute because I'm probably not going to be very generous in a minute. King Mob's on holiday, checking out Uluru with this guy who's a native indigenous person to Australia. We're going to go with Aboriginal there. Sorry if that's not great, but that's what I'm going to go with. I think it's fine. And an older chap. What's really interesting in this panel is King Mob's outfit. It is. I know he's on holiday. It is a horrible outfit. He's got like what are probably very expensive like 90s Westwood bondage trousers on because he's a punk, remember? And this kind of like, again, maybe very expensive, cut off denim waistcoat thing with like leopard print and probably fake leopard print, obviously. So I'm not real sewn on bits of leopard. Leopard print collar thing here. It's like it's it's really horrible. It's a really nasty outfit that he's wearing. Like, and also his like, I know he's in shape and stuff, but like, that's like he's a bit too like he's got this really like circus skills body here, hasn't he? Really like rangy, like muscly, but like kind of rangy, kind of a bit like that's not terribly appealing. He could do with like he's very lean and could probably do with a little bit of extra fat, or at least a bit more bulk on his shoulders and upper arms. Yeah, to sort of like to get the V shape a bit better. Because at the moment, he just looks like he juggles a lot and doesn't eat very well. Yeah. Uh, so yeah, King Bob is basically meeting these guys in Australia. One of this guy's kind of his mate, but this guy he's kind of meeting for the first time. This guy's obviously like he's referred to as the old fella, and the old bloke, and then later on he's referred to as something else. But basically, he's a wise man, and King Mob is going to him for a lesson. And he says, "All right, Gadia." I think Gadia is basically a Aboriginal word for in a certain area, for certain tribes, communities. That means outsider, white blokes, basically Gadia. This is the bloke King Mob. This is the bloke King Mob I was telling you about. King Mob, King Mob. What mob's that? Got a dreaming? He's smoking a cigarette. Got a cool face. Looks cool. Cool guy. And actually this was the bit when I said King Mob, what mob's that? That was the bit where I kind of was thinking, and I was like, that was the bit that made me think and go, oh, hang on, why am I reading this issue at the moment? And then I kind of reflected about what was actually going on with this issue and realised that the world, the shit that's going on with us currently, reflected through the lens of the Invisibles, is King Mob strapped to a chair, being tortured, and attempting to being converted, being, you know what I mean? And the ruling class, in the form of Sir Miles, attempting to capture the power and sovereignty of King Mob for his own ends, right? And they asked him, God are dreaming? King Mob's answer is quite interesting. Scorpion, got one tattooed on my ass. That's not his accent, is it? I got that wrong. And the old guy says, it's a smart white fella knows his own dreaming. Smarter one knows his own ass. Yeah. Got to watch them scorpions, fellas sting bad. And then they do this cool bit of telepathy. Can you hit the old guy is obviously throwing a bit of telepathy at him, and King Mob is smart enough that he can hear the telepathy. I love the way it's communicated through like an old-fashioned comic book thought bubble. Oh, thought bubble. There's no thought bubble this year. It's a shame because of the virus. And he says, "I want to go into the rock to meet the serpent. I'm an initiated man." But obviously, initiations never ends, and he wants this one to continue via the wisdom that he can find from these Aboriginal fellows in the heart of Uluru. Also, okay, so earlier on, yeah, he met, or he was with, we saw Dr. Gupta from India. He's now learning from another medicine man, doctor, wise fella, in Australia. And later in this issue, he will go to. God, I can't remember. No, okay, we'll see someone else in a minute. But we're basically, throughout the course of this issue, we're meeting these kind of stereotypes, or types, let's be a bit kinder, of wise or magical colonial figures, right? A lot of this issue is about King Mob and Sir Miles actually trying to wrestle with their colonial heritage and how a white guy in the 90s and today copes with that, right? How it kind of, where they sit in relation to the rest of the world, given that we are complicit and beneficiaries of that imperial heritage, right? We don't like to think about it, or we do, and we go, we kind of lose ourselves in guilt, which isn't terribly constructive or nice for us, or just go, bollocks, it doesn't mean nothing, mate. Just a bunch of whingers, which isn't, and refuse to kind of attempt reparation, shall we say, or a new perspective, which kind of takes that view of history into account and attempts to kind of create a better us out of it, which they don't want to do. They just want to be old and bastards. And he's meeting these slightly unfortunate, we would call them magical Negroes now. They're kind of like, a trope in fiction when a white author wants to use the perspective of knowledge from other cultures. Yeah. And it's problematic, but it's only problematic. It's not evil, right? It's not cancelable. It's just a bit dumb. I don't think the term magical Negro was even coined in the 90s when this came out. But these figures of these two Aboriginal chaps that King Mob is meeting, they may seem a little bit clunky, but is there ill there? I don't even mean ill intent. Is there ill effect there? Like, are we literally saying that a white guy can never write a character who's not white? We'll get to that in a couple of episodes time, actually, a couple of issues time, when we find out about Boy and Morrison kind of like ventriloquizing through the body, or the character, not the body, for fuck's sake, the character of a black woman, right? There was some trick you pulled off today, mate. Joey's a clever man, you know, lawman. Joey's been to the moon and back. And there's a cool panel where, like, the moon, which obviously looks a bit like Barbalif, is silhouetting King Bob's gun. No white fella's ever been allowed in the Rook. That's a sacred place. King Bob's reply is, I'm not a white fella, Jerry. I'm a scorpion dreaming. So King Mob is here basically saying that he has jettisoned all of his imperial baggage, all of his bad, ancestral and linear karma, by kind of selling it to the Scorpions. Yeah, we'll get to some Scorpion stuff in a minute, but we know that King Mob has got a Scorpion relationship from the Jim Crow voodoo episode, right, where Baron Zaragoza says, this guy's he's asked us for gifts and now he's got to pay the price. So basically, in quite typical white guy fashion, it kind of sounds like King Mob has outsourced his kind of racial karma to the Scorpion gods, and is kind of trying to not pay the debt, or actually is paying the debt, and that's what's happening in this issue, and that's what this is all. That's why he finds himself strapped to a torture chair, and he's got his villains have got him, his enemies have got him, right? I'm not a white fella, Jerry. I'm a scorpion dreaming. This obviously feeds into something which is quite current at the time, which is that if you just gap year hard enough and find the best beach and have the most authentic spiritual raving experience while you're abroad, you can jettison or redeem or absolve or clear that colonial inheritance, imperial inheritance, whichever one you think is the best way to say that, which was a very current idea at the time, but it's very forgiving for white guys, right? It's very convenient for us. So I think it's a little bit. I think it might be total bollocks. Sorry. And we're back, and then over the page on page 11, we're back in the room. Samars is doing the proper mind meld with King Mob, trying to read his mind, and he's obviously just read this bit, this kind of episode, this memory of King Mob's travels in Australia is one that Samars is just kind of like pulled from his mind and is with him, and he says, I'm there with you tiptoeing through those dusty, twisting corridors of locked doors. That's where you keep all the damp, wet things, isn't it? Slimy things, secrets. And then suddenly the script flips, and we're not in King Mob's memory anymore. We're in St. Miles's memory, and he has this very abrupt flashback while he's kind of like attempting brain interface with King Mob, remember, into his own past. Where look, and suddenly, we're learning a lot. We learn a lot about St. Miles in the course of these this half a page. And suddenly we're back in we're back in St. Miles's childhood, sorry, and he's watching this beautiful sad-eyed fox be torn apart by this pack of hounds. And look, he's dressed like a huntsman, like he obviously was and has been, and and we know that since this, since this boy grew up to be the leader of the hunt, kind of in Glamis, in the grounds of Glamis Castle, and also in the city, in London itself, right? He hunts. He's the hunter. He does hunt, or he's the huntsman rather than the hunter is probably a better way of saying it. And this is obviously his first hunting experience, which is his own initiation into the, the mystical knowledge and power structures of his own tribe, right? Which is also King Mob's tribe too. But King Mob has got a better perspective on things and is at least trying to, escape this nightmare and build a better nightmare for himself. And so we see a lot. So we get a real snapshot into the whole kind of like the way that all of the other huntsmen in their red jackets don't have heads. They're just these kind of like, and they're behind him. They're just these kind of like influence figures that are pushing Sir Miles into this horrible path. And you can see by the look on his face that he is horrified by this horrible spectacle. And like everything's been on lockdown because of coronavirus. But one of the things which has been allowed to go ahead has been fox hunting in the UK, right? Now, there is a straight up argument that you could make that it is quite easy to stay distance from each other while you're fox hunting. Yeah, okay. Yeah. But really, it's just that's like you're just allowed to do it because that's what the ruling classes like to do, and it's fairly important for them, right? In much the same way as strapping King Mob to a chair and torturing him with culture technology is. If you can't, basically, you demonstrate and reinscribe your right to rule the land in the UK. This is our traditional way of doing it by having the power, skill, and organizational and time and organizational capacities and time and resources to kill a fox. If you can kill a fox, which is a very sort of handy and obvious symbol of the freedom of nature, then yeah, if you can kill one of those, then you have kind of demonstrated and achieved the right to rule the whole land. Basically, I would really encourage everybody. The Brexit lawyer guy, sorry, the anti-Brexit lawyer guy. Think about what he did on Boxing Day, 2019, a few weeks after the last election in the UK, when all hope of avoiding Brexit was lost. Think about what the anti-Brexit lawyer guy did, and what that tells you about what side he was on all along. Okay, you really need to think about that. If you don't know what I mean, that's fine, but if you do know what I mean, you need to pay attention to it, because this ritual here of the fox being killed on British soil is an essential part of how the ruling class establishes itself here, right? Now, there's more to it than that. These are dogs, okay? So dogs have a special relationship to the dead, right? And the fox is like, the reason that the fox is so important is because it is red and sinuous and wild and unpredictable and beautiful. So there are kind of there's sex magic and star magic stuff encoded in this panel too, right? Yeah, just think about that. But this panel and also, yeah, check this out. I really like this detail here in the corner. You've got a horse with no rider, obviously, because the riders are all here. You've got a horse with his leg up. There's a brilliant urban legend that, like, you can read in the statues of men, it is always men, on horseback in London. So we have statues, memorials of like old dudes in London, right? Some of them are on horseback, and there's this legend that you can tell that whether the horse has got one or two legs off the ground, or indeed is like rearing up with maybe three legs off the ground. You can tell. No, not three legs off the ground. That's wrong. You can tell. It tells you like a story. There's a code in there about what happened to that person. So it's meant to be like if the horse has one foot off the ground, like this horse here, then then the rider, who's been memorialized in the statue, was wounded in battle. If the horse has two hooves off the ground, they were killed in battle. And if the horse has all four legs on the ground, they weren't wounded or killed in battle. They kind of just died and they died of natural causes, or they weren't a victim of war, right? It's not true, because it doesn't fit with the historical record of the 11 or 12 or so um, horse person on horse statues that there are in London. But it's a cool story. It's definitely the kind of thing that people would thought was like clever London knowledge at the time, and it is interesting in the way that it shows us that Sir Miles is being wounded here, right? The trauma is obvious from his kind of downcast expression, but and because of what we know about how he was kind of just battered into becoming one of these headless things as he grew older at this moment. But if we assume that this is Miles's horse, and it's got one leg, it's got 1 foot off the ground, it's saying this is a wound, yeah. And also just look at the poor Foxy's eyes. So that's weird. So he's doing a mind meld with King Mob, but suddenly he's mind melding with himself. He's being thrown back. His own memories are being thrown back at him when he's meant to be searching for King Mob's memories. And King Mob's like, "Ugh," and Samara's like, ah, because that's not meant to happen. And Dr. Frankland, B.A. Robertson, is all like, Samara, what's wrong? Now, okay, this is a great sequence. The next 2 pages, we're on pages 12 and 13. So that's really freaked Miles out, and so he's got to recover from that, or just recombobulate himself a bit. So he goes to the bathroom and is washing his face. This bathroom is actually quite taffy, and I presume this is basically, it's like, where are they at this point? And we'll never get a very clear answer to that for good reasons, but that's later. But don't know what that was. But we don't really know where in London they are, and it's probably like some underground Churchill World War II bunker thing, right? Because it is a bit tatty. It's not somewhere like plush. The toilets in the Home Office would be better looked after than that, right? So he's washing his face in the loo, trying to get his shit together after uh, having his own memories reflected back at him by King Mob. And the reason I paused there was because I haven't really noticed this before, but in this panel here, there's quite a funny little detail. I think it's just a joke that these are like the doors of the toilet stalls, and you can see it looks like somebody's doing a shit in there because you can see their feet kind of underneath the gap at the door. But they're wearing quite kind of funky space age kind of Spice Girl almost trainers. Not Spice Girl, but like funky 90s trainers. And it's quite funny to assume that, to imagine that this really like messed up sequence between Mrs. Dwyer and Sir Miles is going on, and there's somebody in there who's kind of like finished doing their poop. It's like, I'm not going to leave the loo just yet. I'm just going to sit here for a bit until they're finished doing what they're doing. So that's a nice joke, and it's a really good sequence. She's like, is he King Mob? And he's like, I don't know for sure, but the fact that he was just able to reflect my own memory back at me means that he's got something going on, which means, yes, of course he's King Mob, but I just don't know for 1,000,000% sure yet. And as I kind of said before, one of the decent things I did say in the previous half of this issue, but I didn't express it very well, was that like the conversion process, they have to convert the whole unit, right? So the fact that like he does need to know that it's King Mob. It's not enough to just assume, because they're on the like the official side, right? Because their whole thing is about law, even though it's not like UK law as we understand it. Because it's about rules and order, they must get a confession without uh without risking tainting the confession by torturing him, yeah, or like by physically mutilating him, because then 2 things have happened. One, they've broken the law and they're not meant to do that because the law is them, yeah. And 2, they've lost on their investment. They've broken the asset that they want to have. They've devalued it. Uh, and she's like, just get on with it. And he's like, no, like he just threw my own memories back at me. He's obviously got some psychic powers. What you're asking me to do, he says, I can't go in there. I can't go in there again. You're asking me to put my sanity at risk. And then we see this very new side of Miss Dwyer all of a sudden. Actually, we saw a bit of it last week. We saw last issue. We saw that she's basically in charge. But she's like, but she makes it very explicit here. You've been a useful servant, Sir Miles, but I'm beginning to think that blue-blooded arrogance of yours has made you forget your position in the hierarchy. Get down on your knees. And they have this very kinky, quite sexy, if you're honest. You know, it's pretty dark and weird, but it's also kind of hot. Bit where she strips off and she's, you know, it's to be noted that she's wearing quite a King Mobby kind of corset here. She's got these kind of like horrible like purple veins on her tits. And she sort of starts to suckle Sir Miles, and it's really grim. But yeah, kind of sexy. And she's talking about being a candidate for modification, which is presumably what this unnatural bodily strangeness that she has going on here. They may even consider you as a candidate for modification. It's quite an experience, believe me. I want you to go back into his mind, Samal. So she's going to make him go back and sort King Mob out. But he won't, she says, but you won't go alone this time. Come and take communion from me. So this suckling is a form of communion. Drink up your medicine, let it into you. And he's like, oh, no, I don't want to do this. There's no need for this, Miss Dwyer. And she's like, don't be coy. Don't be coy, Samal. If I was pretending to be your nanny, you'd pay me good money for this. Now, okay, so there's a lot going on this double page spread. Okay, so we need to remember that this is in the mid-90s, this is the golden age of the Tory dominatrix, right? One of the things which eroded the Tory right to rule after the apparently kind of like endless long decade of Thatcherism, decade plus, was that the sexual proclivities of these high-ranking old school Tory MPs was made public. And it's funny because it's funny. Sorry, not kink shaming, but kink laughing. It's funny, and it just kind of stripped them of their dignity, right? So, and suddenly the public didn't take them seriously as people who could, or more importantly, deserved to hold office, right? And that was a huge problem that they had. And this has been covered in. I've mentioned it a few times, but there's, apart from all of the issues of the Invisibles, there are a couple. Only one of them has been published up to this point, but there are eventually a couple of short King Mob 6-page stories which appear elsewhere. One of them was in the Vertigo Rave. It was a 6-page story called Hexy, and kind of dealt with like King Mob versus a evil Tory MP who was like deeply into BDSM, right? And he's very much like Sir Miles, this guy that King Mob is kind of fighting in that story. And I had kind of assumed that Sir Miles would be heavily into BDSM as well. And he probably is. He probably is. But and BDSM is like quite a cool kink, right? That's quite a cool one. But she also reveals here, she says, don't be coy, Sir Miles. If I was pretending to be your nanny, you'd pay me good money for this. So obviously he can be both. But Sir Miles's other kink is that he's like one of those dudes who like dresses up as an adult baby and get them like suckles on his nanny. And that isn't a cool kink to have. That is just grim and funny. And yeah, if you like, I'm kink shaming here. Don't care. But yeah, like long, like executive 4-course executive lunches on a Thursday, and then he goes to like a flat in Chelsea where a woman dresses him up as a baby, and then he shits into his nappy and makes her change it. That's the kind of thing that someone else likes to do on his downtime, which is hilarious. And okay, but the other thing that's quite important here is to remember what we knew about Miss Dwyer. Now, there's not much to go on because she has only appeared on like 3 or 4 pages prior to this moment. And I think I probably talked about it a little bit back in issue 1, but Dwyer is a name that means black, as in, not African skin. Obviously, it means black, like the color. And uh, the Dwyer name is they were like Irish nobility, but they kind of slowly got dispossessed as kind of English nobility sort of like took over, uh, and they thereafter basically became historically like a very reliable martial force, or not force, but like resource for uh, upper class in a military sense, right? They basically, like the Dwyers, they lost a lot of their kind of land and titles or whatever and money, but the profession that they went into was basically soldiering because they were Irish nobility. They had obviously been fighting beforehand because that's how they captured the land that gave them their nobility, right? So they kind of took these kind of like long-standing family military skills and sort of sold them to the ruling classes uh, throughout the world, or throughout Europe at least. Uh, so that's what the Dwyers did and do as like a family name. Um, and that's also what the early Illuminati groups in northern Italy, who we talked about quite a lot when Byron and Shelley were in northern Italy during the Arcadia story arc. That's what those early Illuminati families did too, and and that's like, if you think about the way that oh Christ, they're not called Blackwater anymore either. They're called like Defense X or something. Um, but if you think about the way that clandestine, private military organization is no less a really big thing than it was in the Italian Renaissance. That's kind of the identity of the baddie that we're dealing with here. We're not necessarily dealing with the state as such. We're dealing with people who deal in money and murder as a means of projecting and protecting their own power in the world. Okay, uh, that's probably fairly complicated, and but yeah, think about private military companies in the UK and in the US where they are currently and what they get up to, and like how like that strip of activity, which is kind of, obviously isn't subject to democratic oversight or whatever. Think about how that and Miss Dwyer maybe factor into a calculus of power that we need to understand in order to understand the present day, and not just the present day, but history too, right? Uh, music, magic, secrecy, soldiery. But what's interesting here is that we're given it, like, she did boss him around earlier in the previous issue, but she's really like dominating him here. He doesn't mind. uh, but and he is taking communion from her. Now, the other thing that we know about Miss Dwyer, which is just very clear from kind of the way that she's presented, is that she's young, she's a woman, and she's capable, she's efficient. Yeah. And think about where we are, right? As we're just beginning to transition, like Blairism is still a year away. Clinton Blairism is emerging as a profile for the ruling classes to take, which is different to the deeply kind of old school post-war aesthetic and vibe and methodologies too that the post-war ruling classes had used, the Atlanticists had used up to this point, right? There is a shift, there is a definite shift in tone as the centre left, uh, which is basically the same as the right, let's be honest, uh, adopts, as kind of Clinton Blair become the cozy face of ruling class power, right? In the mid 90s, and this is it happening here. Is that all of the kind of the aristocratic, what she calls his blue-blooded arrogance, that isn't, as much as Samars looks like the kind of guy who should be in charge. The thing that's running the show and calling the shots isn't blue-blooded arrogance. it's this kind of like calculating efficiency, right? She's like, Miss Dwyer isn't a racist insofar as she kind of doesn't really like race isn't part of her calculus, other than that like a black unit might require slightly different set of codes in order to be calculable and manageable than a white unit does. That's the only difference that race makes to her. Uh, she's just a neoliberal calculating techno machine. Yeah, techno machine. Like that's sorry, that's a bit of an oxymoron, but a technocratic machine, right, is what she represents. And she's young and she's female and she's nicer. You know, she's not as obviously like an old bastard as Sir Miles is, and but she's calling the shots here and now. His blue-blooded arrogance had made him forget his position in the hierarchy. Really, being old school and upper class and taming foxes may be, symbolically important and practically useful, but what's actually going on is this kind of ruthlessly efficient machine thinking. And I'm not. Maybe that's not convincing at this point because we haven't seen enough of her machinic qualities, but we will. Yeah, and he's like, ooh, and he's like being forced to drink what is, let's be honest, the black milk, and he's gonna, and she's like, she's enjoying it. Bite harder. It's really kinky, kind of hot in a kind of why do I think that's hot way, but yeah, but a lot is going on in this double page spread, and the it's about a different understanding of the power relation between old school public school old boys network power and ruthlessly efficient machinic technocratic power, right? And that's why it can be a woman, because gender, race, all of these kind of markers of superiority and inferiority, which someone like Sir Miles would believe in, the machine doesn't care. Over the page, okay, we've got quite a weird double page spread here. We're on pages 14 and 15. We're back with Boy checking out King Mob's house. He's just been rumbled by the cops, remember? And we get quite a perfunctory sort of action sequence where she punches a cop and runs away. And Phil Jimenez is working really hard to make this page seem more interesting than it is, with all of these like tumbling, skewed panels. And he does kind of work in one really rather nice moment where, so Boy's kind of like on this first floor balcony in a Brixton sort of block of flats, and she beats up a copper, jumps over the balcony, lands on the top of the cop car, and kind of is jumping off cars onto another car. But there is this nice moment where like we just have her silhouette kind of jumping from panel to panel, and it's a nice little thing of what she's doing. But it also helps the way you read, helps your eye down the page, because the pages are a bit jumbly and there could be quite a lot of different ways to read this, right? Um, 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 yeah, okay. The reason that this page is kind of interesting, well, there's so we've got these great kind of coppers here with their like, oh crikey faces on and their silly old nipple head helmets, and we've got the way that this cop just pulls a nine out of his jacket and starts firing wildly, while the people of Brixton just run for cover, and suddenly it goes very like American action movie for South London. You know what I mean? It's very difficult to imagine this taking place in a way, and indeed, it doesn't look quite right. This whole sequence isn't quite right, because of that kind of peculiarity of tone. And then she gets rescued by this chap up here, who we see in the first panel, and he's wearing like a Pan African badge, and uh, he kind of like is it a cab that he's driving? I don't think it is it? No, he kind of, but it's just a bit yellow, and because there's so much American happening on this page, uh, it feels like that could be a cab, but it's not. He's just got a yellow car, and there's all gunfire ringing out. He this chap here who we learn is okay. Let's just let him do his talking. I am not going to do the accent. Brinsley Wellington, scourge of Babylon and all police constable. And there's no ting I and I like more than the sight of me daughter making trouble for dem lawman. I'm not making this up. Uh, uh, so he's been written to speak in this kind of annoying, not annoying. Sorry, just like it's annoying because he's been written like it, sort of like Jamaican patois, right? And it's called Brinsley Wellington, which is a very like colonial name for a dude to have. And it's not unrealistic, but like there are two signifiers of like slave owners here, and uh, this is the third post-colonial subject that we run into in this issue. Right? We've had the guy from India, we've had the guys from Australia, and now we get a guy from the West Indies, and he and it's weird. It's just like, and he doesn't appear in the comic again, but he just pops in and rescues Boy from Special Branch, and he's going to get in trouble here. Like he's really risking himself because that kind of dust that's obscuring his number plate means that the cops can't see him either, can't see his number plate either. Like they're going to find him. They're going to find him after this. Uh, so it gives us quite a nice little. So we are seeing other invisibles. I think that's kind of the point that the comic wants you to, on the surface, have here, is that you go to India, there are invisibles there. If you go to Australia, you'll find invisibles there. And if you go to Brixton, an invisible will just pop up out of nowhere and rescue you from the cops who are after you, which is a nice thought. But the depiction of him with this kind of with his patois is like it's awkward to say the least, and maybe a bit patronising, you have to say. Uh, but he's drawn quite nicely with a real like glint in his eye, and then there's kind of like a weird thing that sort of happens in a bit. But yeah, so like you know, one of the things that we're learning is that like the natural resistance strategies of these colonial cultures, not colonial cultures, like colonial territories, and the way that they have kind of fought back against Babylon and all police constable, uh, is invisibilism, right? So post-colonial struggle or anti-colonial struggle and invisibilism are a bit the same. Remember how we learned during the Arcadia arc that like revolution and invisibilism are kind of the same too, although they kind of happen. There's a point where a revolution ceases to be invisibilism too. Uh, the Invisibles have allies and they're everywhere and they're subaltern, I guess you'd call them, right? I guess you'd say. And oh yeah, there's another nice little shot up here of Brinsley skipping across the hood of his own car in a way which people don't really do to get in the car so that he's able to come and rescue her and come get in. We're gonna leg it. But yeah, it's a bit of a it's quite a strange couple of pages. They don't quite they definitely don't have the clarity of this or the significance, but there is a certain amount to think about in there. Okay, and we're back in Australia, and King Mob is in Uluru, and he sees these dudes painted on the wall, the Wangina. The Wangina are basically, I think they're usually figured as like, or described as like, storm spirits, weather spirits, which is obviously if you're living in those are spirits you really want to have on your side if you're living in a place which doesn't have terribly high amounts of rainfall. King Mob is there. He's walking through the underground, right? And he bumps into this massive. This is great. I love this bit. It's so because this is meant to be like really happening. Like this isn't one of his Lazarus. No, not Lazarus Churchyard. This isn't one of his Gideon Stargrave fantasies. This is actually a memory of his. This is something that happened to King Mob in the real life of the comic. And it's this awesome, such a good picture big red fish, big red metal robot fish in the heart of Uluru. And he says, Jesus Christ Almighty, as he looks at it, and it's a great, it's a really great panel. It's really good. This kind of, again, it's red, a bit like the fox that Samiles met earlier. It's red and coiling, and there's obviously things lurking behind it. Now we can kind of tell from the big red dot on its side that it's Barbalith, and indeed it is. So let's not. I don't want to kind of worry too much about following along the the spoilerization of that. Oh yeah, these kind of like metal barnacles that the big fish has got on it are really good. Really like those. Great detail. Yeah, just like wonderful sort of like bit of like Moorcockian Imaginaria being kind of pulled out and thrown in the comic by Morrison and then drawn spectacularly by Himmler. Great little page. And so he sees this fish and comes into contact with Barbalith through it, and he basically undergoes his version of what Dane underwent when he was abducted by the aliens on the Blue Mold in the abandoned tube station, right? A few issues back. And he starts to kind of like he starts to sort of 90s comic it up in the way that he's speaking. You know, what do I mean by that? I mean like Barosian cut up language. Yeah. This was like this kind of like I've taken quite a lot of speed and I've got a deadline. Stream of consciousness writing was a big thing for Morrison and other comic book writers called like John Smith and Peter Milligan and Alan Moore, let's be honest. At the time, all of this like lots of words happening very quickly but with no punctuation. There's a red, but King Mob says there's a red thing, Barbalith. I'm trying to run, but it's everywhere. The world's going flat, falling away. X-ray cinema. Can't describe it. Noise like water sizzling on a hob. Molecular motion. Tiny teeth, a million sharp little teeth, stripping me down to nothing, chewing me into atomic dust. And then let's stop there. Let's go. Then we're interrupted in King Mob's little stream of consciousness monologue, psychologue, by this advert for Blood and Shadows. Across the ages, he wreaks unspeakable horror. It's a Vertigo comic by Joe Lansdale, who's like a kind of a pulp horror writer, and drawn by Mark A. Nelson. It's a 4-issue miniseries. He's got a big grin, and we were just talking about. Okay, so this fits into the comic quite well because he's talking about King Mob's free associating as he's encountering Barbalith includes the words I just read out. A million sharp little teeth, stripping me to nothing, chewing me to atomic dust. And there we've got it's not a million, but this man's got a lot of shit. He's called it's called like hang on, I'll skip ahead and find out what he's called because he has got a really stupid funny name. Sorry, bear with me. The God of the Razor. The God of the Razor. Okay, so I'm skipping ahead here to the On the Ledge column, which is written by Joe R. Lansdale. And that's how I know that this guy is called the God of the Razor. I haven't read this comic. This is how I know that this guy is called the God of the Razor. But he says quite interestingly here that the God of the Razor made an appearance in a Batman short story that Joe R. Lansdale had written before called Subway Jack. Now, I just said that, and I meant it, that this sequence that we're encountering here on page 17, that's the equivalent of Dane's initiation and contact stroke abduction experience in the underground or subway. And obviously Dane isn't called Dane, he's called Jack. And this character appeared in a story called Subway Jack. And we can tell by the way that he looks a bit like Jack the Ripper that maybe this character was called Subway Jack in that Batman short story, even though he's called the God of the Razor now. Such a stupid name. It's a rubbish name. But I can't work out whether the fact that he's got these sort of razor blades in my fingers. He's obviously this quite cheap sort of like Hellraiser Pinhead sort of knockoff, like the God of the Razor. the sublimity of the sharpness. His skin is pared from flesh. All that kind of bullshit, Good fun, but this is like a pretty low rent version of it, I think it's fair to say. But it's good. He's got a razor on his tie, like a tie pin, in case you didn't think he had enough razors. In case you missed the fact that, in fact, that he's got razors all in his fingers. He's got razors all in his fingers. How does the god of the razor talk? Does he talk like this? Or does he talk like this? It's quite difficult to know, isn't it? He's also got a lot of razors on his big top hat. He's got a Jack the Ripper from Hellish kind of vibe. But what's funniest is that he's got like what I presume is like meant to be like a folded straight razor in his pants, and it's massive. He is pleased to see you, and he has got a massive folded straight razor in his pants. So it's quite a cheesy image, but it does really fit the flow of the issue insofar as the god of the razor, so maybe let's think about how does that relate to Bible. Let's maybe think about, a paring away principle. If we run it into the next page, they tell me I can get away from the pain by not identifying with the body. This is King Mob's fucked up trance speech again. That's the point of the pain. That's why they do it. The shock makes me remember. So we could think that these nightside creatures, in the way that they terrify us and also kind of like strip away unnecessary psychic and physical meat from us. It's October, by the way. Is necessary. Is good. Is part of the soul's cleansing ascension kind of process. Yeah. It fits really neatly into the flow, basically. So, because the whole thing about the millions of tiny sharp teeth, and then I can get away from the pain by not identifying with the body. That's the point of the pain. That's why they do it. It all does fit together rather neatly. But also, he's not just saying this in the cave in Uluru. He's saying this out loud in the chair now, so that Samals and Dr. Franklin can hear him. And then we get a little shot of this Wangina, who is very obviously just like the same as the Grey from Dane's abduction. King Mob's glossolalia, or trip speak, gets way overboard. A swarm of tiny particles reflecting something. I'm missing out all of that like coughing noises that he's making, because he is still bleeding to death in the torture chair, remember. Something in me, not mirrors, they're talking cabalexic neurostasy, transmater elliptocryptic hypnosis, ectogens, infloplacental hallucinogen systems. What's really nice about this, as much as Dr. Franklin and some miles are going, what's he talking about? I don't get it. He's like, it is just there. It's just on the page, just in the words. And it's quite easy to get. But his temperature, Dr. Franklin says, his temperature and pulse are completely out of control. We could be losing him, Samars. And Samars can't let him die, as Miss Dwyer has just told him. So he punches him in the head, says, don't die, damn you! Which is a very Samars move to make. And Samars is sweating a lot at this point. He's quite hyped up. And Dr. Franklin notices and he says, are you all right? And Miles says, it's the milk, Franklin. It's alive in me. This is what he was just suckling from, I remember, when it was sexy and gross. It's alive in me. Tiny viral machines in her milk. Cellular biocomputers, like some kind of intelligent infection. Now, we think about, it's just interesting the kind of the metaphors that we use to think about technology, right? We often think about computers in terms of like either like waves, like kind of invisible radio signals like Wi-Fi, or wires, or gadgets, or like circuitry, right? These are kind of the ways that I think we think about what we mean when we say technology. But technology is also, or But like, remember how we've used the term viral and virality to describe digital computer processes, and in fact, well, okay, to describe digital computer processes when they come into contact with the social sphere. Since the beginning of the internet era, like viruses and virality, and this kind of like biological way of thinking about computers is really like original to it, right? Really like innate to it. And we're in 1996, like Windows 95 literally just launched a couple of months ago from this comic, and the world is just beginning to be turned into a computer by the computer. And King and Sir Miles, I keep nearly saying King Mob every time I mean Sir Miles, because there are real similarities between the two characters. Basically, Sir Miles is King Mob's dad, kind of thing, or the old thing that King Mob could grow into. That's kind of it, isn't it? Um, it's the milk, Franklin. It's alive in me. Tiny viral machines in her milk. So on the one level of the story, he's basically just had his evil superpowers juiced up by drinking the black milk from the evil queen bee. Uh, Bees don't have milk, but you know what I mean. And they're viral biocomputers. Now, now obviously, I'm not going to belabor the point too much about King. Like, I did it again about Sir Miles's hard on for control and viruses and virus computer overlapping, right? 2020, right? Welcome to 2020, folks. The ruling class has got a virus computer, not a computer virus, but a virus that's a computer in it that it's using to amplify its power to control and torment and convert the innate power of King Mob. Okay? That I'm sorry, I think I said that much more better than I meant to, but that's literally what I mean. I'm going to try and say it again. The ruling class is using virus computers to amplify its power to control the innate power of King Mob and convert it. 2020. The comic's magic. So there's more. He does like we can see there's orange light and sweaty eyes, which means psychic powers are really happening now. And he properly is like, I'm going to use my new virus psychic powers to get right into King Mob's head, and he does. He kind of bashes through all of King Mob's psychic defenses. I love how it's just like an X-Men comic at so many points. And he's like, he's King Mob is basically just Professor X being tortured by the Shadow King. That's quite a deep cut. Magneto, if you like. And then boom, we get Baron Zaragoza, the Scorpion God, who King Mob has sold out, has owes a favor to, right? And King Mob described himself as a scorpion dreaming. Is this a scorpion dream? Is this a scorpion dreaming? Is this what layer of King Mob's consciousness is this swarm of cosmic dream scorpions on? Is this the real him, or is this a thing which is around him, which Sir Miles is kind of barred access by? Or is the fact that Sir Miles can see it mean that it's, that access is achieved? What is interesting is that, like, King Mob says earlier, right, that he's not white anymore because because he's not a white fella. He's a scorpion dreaming, and this is obviously either scorpions dreaming or a dream of scorpions, or this is the scorpion dreaming. One might say this space. And does that do the trick? Can you jettison your whiteness by trading it for this? I'm not sure. I mean, it's interesting the implication that these like pretty scary scorpion dudes, who, as we've been told by the wise man said, by the lawman said, they sting bad. That's better than our colonial heritage. Maybe. But it's also fairly interesting to reflect that, as we sort of discussed in the Jim Crow voodoo issue, that Baron Zaragoin is largely the creation stroke discovery of Michel Berthier and what are they called? The cult of the Black Snake, such a cool name. And his voodoo Gnostic guys, right? Voodoo one, Gnostic, voodoo one, Gnostic workbook. And that's maybe a slightly weird post-colonial concoction too, because Michel Berthier is as honest and authentic as I think his connection to Haitian culture is. He is kind of just like an American guy who's made up, but explicated, let's say, or co-created, co-discovered this scorpion entity that King Mob has used to jettison his colonial heritage, or redeem, or trade. It's a tricky one. Good God, those things! So obviously Samael's concealed this. Good God, those things! What's happening? And then this page 8, just the colouring on it, the way that he goes from like sort of overlit to the point of being black and white to being like photographic negative black and white. Remember how I spoke about photographic negative capture being like a thing in the Jerry Cornelius stories? And then boom, what the hell? Wasn't expecting this to happen. But sexy young 20s Fapper lady. What? That's Edith. Is that Edith when she was young? That's Kali, who Kali, the goddess of Indiana Jones movies. And it all gets a bit crazy. That's quite sexy too. I'm in his mind, obviously, or memories, or spirit, or whatever. Smells of opium smoke and musk and dried flowers, the ancient moon shedding its skin of light, becoming young again. Like, becoming young again, right? A red curtain, very dirty. A red curtain parts beaded with sweat. I'm tasting her precious waters and liqueurs. That's very Typhonian stroke voodoo and Gnostic. It's just we've talked about it before on the show. It's just having sex with a woman while she's on her period. It's fine. I'm tasting her precious waters and liqueurs. Time is all wrong. I'm afraid of her. Cannibal queen of extinction. I love her. So the mirroring here of what we saw with Miss Dwyer a minute ago. Remember the black and white and the killer queen vibe that we've got here, killer goddess thing. Not that Kali is necessarily a bad dude. She's just got a bad dude. Not necessarily that Kali is a bad lady. She's just got a bad job. She's just got a difficult job, right? Role. She's the destroyer, the spider dancer on the funeral pyre of time and space. Remember all of the spider imagery that we had in the voodoo pathworking sections of the Jim Crow issue. So yeah, there's a lot going on here, and it has quite a lot of meaning on the kind of the level of like semiotic and magical. Let's be honest, it's quite difficult to kind of talk about this stuff without using like occult terminology, but the magical formulae that's being not very coyly discussed here. It's fairly out in the open. This is quite a big part of like the way that the Invisibles kind of constitutes itself and like it explains itself, right? This is part of what is going on with it is connecting across time with sex magic. Yeah. And there is more to it than having sex with somebody when they're on the period. But the taboo around it is largely about that. God help me, she's like an ocean, a virgin rising from the menstrual foam. I'm losing myself in. Corpse goddess, thinking of death and lust, and the thunderbolt strikes the bell. This is all Kundalini shit, yeah. Fire snake ripping up through the spinal channels. Uh, yeah, no, I won't tell you about that actually. Detonations ascending the royal road, unfolding into 1,000-petaled lotus, the universal engine, the light of 1,000,000 moons rising in her, in me. Oh. So yeah, and this is obviously King Mob having sex with Edith, but she's young, but maybe she's not. Maybe that's just an illusion, right? Maybe that's just the ancient moon shedding its skin of light. We will find out in a while what's going on here in more like prosaic terms. But at the moment, we've just got this. What is? I mean, and let's reflect on how fucking ace the art is here. And it's a bit of a shame that there's a page transition, because those two pages together would be a real feast of interesting panel layouts and good colours, lovely draftsmanship, and really like fine quality inking. And this kind of like grayed out. It looks a bit like Edith's room in Paris, right? But all of these fine furnishings and heavily kind of orientalized again. Yeah, the one I know that this is like India, but this here, like the decoration in Edith's room is very like early 20th century Orientalist style, right? Which is got a lot of India in it, but also a lot of China, and kind of that East Asian perspective is the kind of the missing bit of the colonial journey eastward that the figures in this narrative, in this issue, have been taking. Yeah. So we do finally get kind of like to the Far East, as we should say, creepy, sexy skull, tantric sexing, uh, excellent sort of various ways of imaging uh, Kali there. Actually, I'm not sure. I should have done more research on these three things there. Like, I think these are all kind of like aspects of avatars of Kali, but they obviously would have their own names. And this one's kind of more South American. This is more Fanny's vibe. This one is obviously like kind of with a dead cannibal crone. And this one's kind of like quite pulchritudinous, and I don't know, if you knew a little bit more about this stuff than me, then maybe you would know about the color coding and the various, what do we call them, colors, right? So the various stages of menstrual excretion across different points of the process, and the formulae of ingestion there that are meant to correspond to different changes in consciousness, different dimensional gateways, portals. Uh, my experience with this stuff is not none, but it's fairly limited compared to how deep I think you can go. Uh, yeah, don't know really who that is. Not sure who that is. Although the feathers and the facial kind of sculpting make me think that it isn't maybe Indian, it's maybe more South American. Uh, Great panels. What's good about these panels, right? And I don't want to solve them as like sets of like visual signification, but they're mysterious, they're enigmatic, and they're elusive, and really, really rich with just like their own sense of experience. And it's good stories, guys. It's good storytelling. It's good comics. It's just good art. It's good. Yeah, really good. There's a really nice kind of, not just a really nice feel from these two pages, insofar as it is like mysterious. I think that's a really good word for it. Uh, but the way that like the comic itself kind of transitions to that from where it's been, I think it fills in quite a few of the gaps we might not have known were missing from previous Invisible stuff. And yeah, there's a lot there. It's very pregnant. that was pages 20 and 21. Over the page, we've got the On the Ledge column, which I've already sort of mentioned. It's Joe Lansdale talking about Blood and Shadows, featuring the God of Reasons. God of Reasons. Sorry, not funny anymore. Are there any good comics coming out this month from Vertigo? There's a bunch of good ones, really. You got Ted McKeever, you got Peter Milligan, you got Garth Ennis. Yeah, you've still like Chiaroscuro, The Private Lives of Leonardo da Vinci is still chugging away. We've also got Dog Moon, a prestige format one-shot written by Grateful Dead lyricist Robert Hunter and hauntingly painted by Timothy Truman of Jonah Hex, is at once a horror story, a love story, and a lyrical epic. The eerie tale, oh, that sounds terrible actually. The eerie tale of a truck driver who, just like the mythic Charon on the River Styx, in case I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that association would have been fairly thoroughly laid out, overdetermined, you might say, in the comic itself. Transports the just dead to the place awaiting them and his ordeal when he falls in love with one of his charges. Dog Moon. Remember stuff we were talking about earlier. Also, the Grateful Dead are really key to the California psychedelia vibe that the Invisibles trucks with a lot. Also Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters and the kind of the dissemination of LSD into the cultural imaginary, the Grateful and the kind of like neo-nomadism that the Grateful Dead's kind of followers, the Deadheads, were all about. What am I going to say about that? Basically, if the counterculture was a CIA and LSD and that dissemination were a CIA plot, i.e., like the baddies working, maybe that's a really good inflection point for thinking about how the baddies maybe sometimes aren't the baddies, even if they are trying to be. Or, less twist-eternally, the message-nology of the Grateful Dead and those nomadic practices maybe they're not good. Maybe that is the bad guys tricking you into doing what they want. So we've talked at length about, LSD maybe and the Grateful Dead's responsibility for that. Stopping the anti-war movement in America and allowing the Vietnam War to go on for much longer than it needed to. And think about, this is quite a now thing to think about. Think about how a nomadic subject suits the requirements of digital capital, right? Think about how a mobile workforce, what's needed of one, or a spatially delocated workforce suits capitalism just fine. Right now, especially, welcome to 2020, but kind of broadly from the horizon of this 90s digital moment where they're like, what's this digital future that we're going to all be living in? What are these tiny viral computer machines gonna create? What are they gonna need to have to live with and in and through? And that nomadic lifestyle, much as it might be kind of cool in loads of ways, isn't countercultural. It just fits with what the overculture wants now, right? As the overculture ascends its own pyramid. Right, kids? Over the page, we're on to page 22. Nasty King. Oh, sorry, just not the computer. Nasty, cool shot of King Mob with maybe his face being all very badly eaten away by, maybe it's just shadow, or maybe it's been very badly eaten away by the viral programmable necrotizing fasciitis infection that he hasn't got, but that Sir Miles has convinced him that he's got. My God, it's so. Oh, okay. And Sir Miles does help out this mystery thing about the previous pages. It's some kind of debased sex ritual. Okay, thanks, Miles. What were you trying to do? What was the purpose of the ritual? And then, Pajil, what were you trying to do with the ritual? What were you doing the magic to do? Now, remember, when King Mob and Edith were last hanging out, they did. The reason that he'd gone there was to find out, maybe using her psychic link with old Tom, which she insisted no longer existed anyway. They were trying to use it to find Dane. And remember, the last time we saw, so that's what the purpose of, that's what King Mob was doing with Edith in Paris a few issues back. I think debased is maybe a value judgment that we're not interested in, but it was a sex ritual, the purpose of which was to find out where Dane was. And look, we can see him having, you know, God, what's it called? Hitchhiked onto a truck and being driven up to Liverpool. And for Samar, this is brilliant news. This is proper bingo time. This is proper jackpot. He knows where Dane is. It's the bloody McGowan boy. He's going to Liverpool. So he's not. So he's found. So he's confirmed that King Mob is King Mob for definite. Now he knows, and he knows where Dane, who he hates, remember, is too. So this is a great twofer for Samar. He's very happy. By God, we've bloody got them. This is King Mob. I've broken him. No more. Somebody help me. Can't take any more. King Mob looks really fucked at this point, right? Bad times. And he is saying, somebody help me. So then over the page, which must be, it isn't numbered, but we must be on page 23 by now. Boy has said goodbye to Brinsley Wellington. I hope she did give him her number. Well, she promised she would. Something bad's happened to King Mob and Fanny. We got big problems. Robin. Uh-huh. Big solutions too. I've mentioned him several times already. Shit, says Boy. And then we've got more. We've got more. I don't really know how Jim Crow speaks, but he's obviously a bit West Indian by some regard, isn't he? Don't you worry about a thing, little sister. Jim Crow's in the house. Now, it's to do with the way that Phil Jimenez draws people, and particularly draws hair. Look at how great Robin's hair is on this page, by the way. It's fantastic with all its little bows in it, and just like mad, like ginger afro. It's just really cool. But oh, I hadn't thought of that, because that's the thing, isn't it? Like the kind of like, is this a really dodgy thing? I apologize if it is, but like, there's like these weird theories that like the redhead genes come from Neanderthals, and that means they're not white, and that means that they are, spiritually African, right? I think there are better ways of saying that, but that's a theory that would have been flying around at the time. So and the way that Phil Jimenez is really good at drawing hair does kind of, and the way they're standing right next to each other does sort of draw a bit of an association there. But yeah, but also, okay, so what I'm trying to say is Jim Crow looks a lot like Brinsley Wellington. So it's almost like in the same way that like these invisible dudes all kind of have their invisible identity that they wear. Maybe Brinsley Wellington's kind of like unfolded invisible identity rather than like the everyday one that he wears would look a bit like Jim Crow. He's kind of, do you know what I mean? Like kind of not within the storyline itself, but kind of within the fabric of the themes of the comic. The West Indian guy that just rescued Boy is kind of turning into another one here, right? Like a kind of a fuller form of that West Indian helping thing. Yeah, is that a bit racist of me? I'm sorry if it is. I really am. But I think I know what I mean. And he's got like a sexy skull right on his crotch. Don't forget. And there was a sexy skull in the bedclothes when young Edith and King Mob were doing it just now. Skulls abound. Okay, so we're on to that's the end of the issue. The next issue is going to be called Revolt into Style, so I look forward to that. We're on to the Invisible Ink Letters page. I remember I'm missing the last advert in the back page because it fell off. I've only got this bit to go on. It might be down there, or it might have been last time. Uh, weekly writing. This is Grant Morris's little preamble. Am I going to read the whole thing? I'll read out a bit of it. Weekly writing this as I attempt to recover from a nasty stress-related abscess. He's got stress-related in quotes, which is what you say when you've been caning it too much, isn't it? Which made me look like the fucking Elephant Man Super Sun for a week and then burst, leaving a hole in my cheek big enough to stick your thumb in, if it was a small thumb and you wanted to stick it in there. A cruel blow for one as vain and superficial as I, but the doctors tell me it'll heal with scarcely a mark. For 3 long days last weekend, however, I suffered the worst, most insistent pain I've ever experienced in my life. A weekend in the camp on Blood Island. I don't know where that is. Now seems like a dream holiday for two. I should look that up. I'm going to look up where Blood Island is. It might just be from a cartoon or comic or something, but it could be. Um, and what a curious coincidence that these bloody bacteria should mount their vicious campaign against my face shortly after I completed this issue, with its similar assault on King Mob's features. Now, this is probably the first sign that we get that Grant Morrison's life and King Mob's lives might be overlapping in uncanny ways. One of his cats died. That's a shame. Sorry to hear that. No, sorry, I misread that. Uh, I misread that paragraph. His cat died a few issues back, didn't it? His cat Trudy has had 2 fine sons. So that's nice. Although isn't 2 quite small for a cat litter? A litter of cats, actually, rather than a cat litter. Cat litter is where they shit, not when they're born. Okay, he does a plug for the Big Book of Conspiracies, which is great. It's one of those big book offs from Piranha Press. It's really good. I would reckon it's all just like quick recaps of conspiracies drawn by like a really good selection of underground and ground level and mainstream um, American comic book artists from the 90s. It's really good. You can pick it up for a couple of quid somewhere. Probably it's really good. So yeah, conspiracies. It provides a lot of the background. It fills in a lot of background material, which may help you to understand the world of the Invisibles a little more. That is true. It does. Finally, thanks also to Sice, Martin, and the Boo Radleys for a couple of fine nights and for dedicating a song to me. So this is what? This is late 2000 and this is late 1994 or early 1995. He's writing this, very early 1995. What probably happened was that maybe around December, Christmas time, the Boo Radleys, the popular Liverpudlian, that's relevant because we're doing some Liverpool stuff again soon. Liverpudlian sort of psychedelic pop band who were on the same record label as Oasis, Creation Records. They've probably done like a December tour. They probably went to Glasgow, and Grant Morrison went to see them, and they probably hung out a bit. And that's interesting because I still have a soft spot for the Boo Radleys, even though they've kind of like aged into sort of slightly duff online guys now. And if you listen to some of their records now, you're like, oh, this is horrible. This is horrible. This is horrible, like Britpop music. But a few of a few of their more psychedelic numbers, I still kind of think work in quite a good way. And certainly at the time, compared to the other bands that were floating around, they were really good. And most importantly, remember how on his playlist last issue, King Mob was listening to, the time and stuff. And so I spent a fair amount of time talking about Ed Ball. I want to say Balls. No, that's different. That's the old politician. Ed Ball, who was the kind of the creative light behind the Time and the shop assistants. No, not the shop assistants. The other one. And by this point, he was doing on this tour. I'm fairly sure he would have been playing keyboards for the Boo Radleys. So it does all fit together in a kind of a closed shop of culture kind of way. And they're all bald guys too, right? Wasim Hussein from Elkridge, MD. Where's MD? Montana? No. Minneapolis, no. Elkridge, MD. Which state is MD? Matt? I don't know. I don't know. Write in and tell me which of the states of America MD is the abbreviation for, the postal abbreviation. No. No. Minnesota, no. I don't know. Yeah. What's he saying? Kind of a nice fan letter from Vasim Hussein. Vasim? Sure, it is Vasim, isn't it? He lives on Waterloo Road. Oh, sorry, I nearly gave away his address. Sorry. He's worried about the Invisible surviving, especially after all of the, because it hasn't been selling very well. He had to do a sigil about it. Remember, we all had to do a sigil about it. Thanks for your support, Wasim. This is Morrison's reply. Thanks for your support, Wasim. Things aren't really as bad as I may have led you to believe. So let's hope then, that the sigil that he published in the comic, that he wanted everybody to power, let's hope that it was what he had told us it was. Because things aren't really as bad as I had led you to believe. It's like, well, you made it seem pretty desperate, mate. Cheeky. Invisible sales have gone up a little again, and I don't think the book's in any real danger yet. It's true that I've been making a conscious effort to keep the stories from becoming too confusing, because obviously it was when it was quite confusing during the Arcadia stuff that all the sales stopped. As I've mentioned before, however, events in the Invisibles are only cryptic in the sense that the plot of a detective novel seems cryptic until you've read that last chapter where everybody gets together in the drawing room and the finger of suspicion falls on timid Mrs. Chumley from the flower shop. The Invisibles is being written as a trilogy of books, and if readers are prepared to stick with it, everything will be explained as we progress towards the end of the world. And yes, I do intend to write some mainstream superhero stuff. Mark Millar, and I are collaborating on a new DC superhero book. What's that refer to? Oh, Aztec, that would be. Aztec, that's all right. And I'll be working on another one very shortly as well. More importantly. So the other one that he'll be working on very shortly as well, that's Justice League, and that's the sigil working. Remember I said that? The thing that stopped the Invisibles from being cancelled really was the fact that he got the Justice League gig, which made him a superstar in the comics world. Whereas at this point he was like just a cult star. Then we get a letter from Charles J. Sperling of the hilariously named Flushing, New York. We've talked about Charles J. Sperling. He's a letter hack. He writes in a lot. He writes long, sort of reference-heavy letters. Is this one okay? It's just a kind of a recap of some previous issues. It's a good letter. He does good letters, but you know. Oh, this is a good bit he writes. So do you remember Jack Flint? Okay, so I'm just going to read the bit out. It's from issue 14. This is Charles J. Sperling. We had Jack Flint watching a striptease, which could have come out of John le Carré's Spy Who Came In From the Cold, in which the nudity was more sad than erotic, like Jack's own life? That's a good point. It's good. It's a good little get there from Charles J. Sperling. He does have a slight tendency to throw in other references to sort of make it clear that he doesn't just read comics, even though he obviously spends a massive amount of his time reading and writing letters to comics. What can I add to that? And but it's a nice letter. Morrison's reply includes Jack Flint and his seedy colleagues in the mysterious Division X will be playing a larger role in the forthcoming Book 2 of The Invisibles. And the hippie, referring to the hitchhiker that King Bob picked up a few issues back, wasn't John O'Dreams, but he may well have been someone like him. That's not helpful. And believe me, that doesn't get terribly clearly clarified. Oxymoron City this week. It does, but it kind of, as well. Okay, the next one is from Alex Boney of Richmond Hill, Georgia. Alex Boney is quite a funny name, isn't it? Oh, what he does, which is quite good, he just asks some questions, which is kind of like a traditional thing in comic book letters columns, and like you just ask them a straight question, and you may get a straight answer. So let's do the questions because we'll learn things. And this is all referring to the events of issue 15, which is Fanny's arc. Yeah, the apocalyptic. No, what's it called? She-Man arc. Oh yeah, sorry. God, no wonder I forgot that. How much of a role does Tlazolteotl play in Fanny's current daily life? Tlazolteotl is her patroness. Remember, the butterfly that has a habit of talking to her and landing on her forehead. Tlazolteotl, this is Morrison's answer. Tlazolteotl remains Fanny's patroness, which is to say she is the symbolic interface between the human Fanny and the timeless world of the gods. Gods in quotes. In return, Fanny must dedicate her extravagant sexual life to Tlazolteotl, who, as mistress of lust and debauch, tends to lead our bewitching boy girl into trouble now and again. Oh dear, sorry for that. Trigger warning, sorry. But there you go. Okay, who is the white-haired, grey-eyed John? Is it the guy Dane replaced? Answer, yes. The white-haired guy was John O'Dreams, the former leader, in quotes, of King Mob's Invisible Cell. John recruited Fanny to the group in 1990 and then went missing in 1992 following the Philadelphia incident, remember, in the church. Hinted at in issue number 9. More on that and more on John coming up in a few months' time. And then this isn't really a question, more of a comment. Alex Boney says, love the connection between Fanny and Orlando. Hope the arcane bastard makes his way back. And then Morrison's answer to that, even though it's not a question, is Orlando will be returning, ... Next letter is from Jenny Clam, who is smart and doesn't include her address, and she's got a funny name. Super cool, super weird, superlatives, super grand. Please don't cancel your book. One of the questions she asks is, these aren't questions that are kind of like laid out as in expecting answers. They're more just like rhetorical questions for the sake of filling up the letter. Is it true that Blur and Oasis have kissed their war goodbye? Remember, this is a thematic and kind of historical reference, which is important to where we're going. What's his answer? I'm not sure about the Blur Oasis armistice. All I know, this is Morrison's answer, obviously. I'm not sure about the Blur Oasis armistice. So this is after. This must be after. Yeah, it must be after the Battle of the Bands when they both released records on the same day and battled to see which one of them would go to number one. And it was Blur. It was fucking rubbish though. Both of the songs are fucking terrible. All I know is that for the first time, I couldn't be bothered buying the new Blur album, which would have been the one called, not Park Life, the one after that. The Great Escape, it's called. Get me and my easy Britpop knowledge. I couldn't be bothered buying the new Blur album, but I did rush to the shops to claim my copy of Oasis's What's the Story? So on, ... So on the battlefield of this human heart, at least, the lads from Manchester have won the day. Now, that's fairly interesting because it's not... Oh, God, am I going to fucking talk about Blur and Oasis again? Jesus Christ. Yeah, so What's the Story, Morning Glory? Oasis' second album is fucking appalling. It's a really bad record. Really fucking, you listen to it now and you're like, what were people thinking? And it's properly one of the biggest selling records of all time in the UK. It's really embarrassing that we should be like that we are like that. But it was huge. So they released these singles, Blur one, then they released their albums. These singles came off, an Oasis one because the Blur album was pretty bad. Although the high points of that are higher than the high points on the Oasis one. Probably, do I mean that? There's one track called He Thought of Cars, which I quite liked because it's a bit JG ballad. But it's not a great record. So Blur won the battle, Oasis won the war, but then it sort of looks like Blur won the peace because obviously Alban sort of split up Blur and became Gorillaz and sort of set a template for pop, which was quite dominant in the noughties, kind of teaming up with like rappers and stuff and like black musicians, which his sound really fucking needed, quite honestly. And uh, and it's a bit, I don't know, I don't know. Ah, fuck it. I can't be bothered talking about Damon Albarn. Who cares? Okay. So this is another question which is a bit less rhetorical from the letter by Jenny Clam. Would you recommend voodoo that's too scary stroke creepy to handle because it's so freaking true? I mean, where do we draw the line between illumination and creepiness? I definitely recommend practical. This is Morrison's answer. I definitely recommend practical experience in the occult world, but I must admit that I found voodoo a little too demanding and culture specific for me. I think it's kind of good that he admits that, but he could probably dig a bit deeper into why that is. Readers with African blood in them would, I think, get a lot more out of it. And wouldn't it be wonderful to see? Oh God, okay, God, this sounds weird. And wouldn't it be wonderful to see 4,000 God-possessed Unga descending on Washington for a rally? Welcome to 2020. Obviously, the details there are wrong, but the thing, if the Hungans aren't possessed by gods, but black people possessed by the righteous indignation against years of police brutality and systematic oppression, which, let's be honest, the Haitian gods are a bit for. But that's part of that oppression is definitely and the kind of that's where they came from, or one of the, not where they came from, but one of the feeding influences, right? Yeah, 2020. So this thing that he says in this issue, about as close as you can maybe get, has actually happened while I've been reading this issue for this podcast. That's why we do the letters pages as part of the comic, because it's the object which is magical, and the activation point that you find it with, right? Find it at. Louis Farrakhan, who was a nonce, I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure. Can rant all day, but I'm still baffled as to why black activists are so keen to convert to Islam, the stifling paternalistic religion of the Middle Eastern stroke North African races. I think that might be bad history. And uh, and I think it's a bit Islamophobic, obviously. But like, this was all just the cut and thrust of like religious debate at the time. We didn't actually follow up these kind of like off the cuff Islamophobic remarks with like 20 years of white phosphorus. Do you know what I mean? But maybe this kind of statement, which we took so uncritically, laid the groundwork for the kind of environment where we could find it in ourselves to bombard, to fucking create generations of birth defects in Fallujah, for instance, right? Fucking hell. Horrible world. Who began the grim tradition of oppression and enslavement of African tribes people. I think blaming Islam for the slave trade isn't okay. I think that's not good. It's things like that which make the whole kind of I've de-whiteified myself by having a rad rave on the beach with my backpack abroad doesn't ring true, right? Because Morrison here is basically blaming slavery, like African slavery, on Islam, and it's like no, it was Christians. In any meaningful way that you, as a white Scottish guy, need to worry about, it was Christians. It was people that look like you. All of this is kind of thrown at like 90s Morrison too. So I don't know if you know Douglas Rushkoff's podcast Team Human, but he had an interview with Grant Morrison on there very recently, and apart from the fact that he's sort of like has a tendency to sort of go over his greatest hits again and again, and say things and like just kind of like fall into grooves and riffs in interviews, which must be very easy to do if you're interviewed a lot. Apart from that, he does seem like a decent bloke. Like honestly, I haven't forgiven him for the MBE thing, and he should be. Somebody should ask him, like, why did you accept an MBE from the Queen of England? Somebody should ask him. John Lennon didn't do it. Or he did, but then he gave it back as soon as he fucking sorted his head out. And David Bowie didn't do it. You know? Why would you do that? And for somebody who's like an anarchist magician, it really doesn't fit. It should be. It'd be like he's not obliged to explain beyond like, well, fuck you, I wanted to do it. But if that's his justification for it, I personally, as a fanboy, obviously, would be interested to hear it. This is continuing the thing. I have a dream of a vast and dangerous voodoo-based cultural movement in America. But perhaps voodoo is way too scary for black American men because it leads to the empowerment of women and lacks the moral simplicity of a monotheistic religion, unlike the repressive male-dominated Muslim faith, M-O-S-L-E-M. As for creepiness, it can't really be avoided in magical work. Fear can be quite helpful in achieving states of gnosis, and laughter is a good way of shaking it off when you've had enough. I tend to view the creepy stuff as repressed material arising from my subconscious mind, so if it's faced and integrated, the fear can be made to work for you. I'm fortunate in that I can just put all of the unpleasantness into my comics and make some money from it. Again, that's a fairly Islamophobic statement, I would say. And, you know, which is really just born out of ignorance, really, you know, like most hatreds, of course, most phobias, most phobicnesses, because obviously Islam is a lot more nuanced than this kind of thing here. But a vast and dangerous voodoo-based cultural movement in America that leads to the empowerment of women and lacks the moral simplicity of a monotheistic religion. That does sound quite good, doesn't it? That sounds quite good. Okay, that's it for the letters page. Next issue, King Mob, Sir Miles, The Room, The Scorpions. Sorry, whistling doesn't work on stuff like this at all, does it? I'm sorry about that. But the Scorpions, you get the joke, right? The truth about Baldy revealed. The truth about the English language revealed. Blimey, that's a big truth for the comic to cover. Get into it, mate. Nice one. Jim Crow gets down. Miss Dwyer prepares for battle. Look forward to that. And Phil and John kick some really serious butt. That's Phil Jimenez and Jim. John? John? Who the fuck is John? I thought it was Andy Lanning doing that. John Stokes. Why did I think it was Andy Lanning? Sorry. Entropy in the UK concluding with a bang in a comic store near you. That sounds great. Like, that sounds great. Looking forward to the next issue and seeing what the fuck's going to happen with King Mob. He spent 3 issues strapped to a chair being tortured. Bless him. That's it. We're done. There's no back page, as I've said. Thanks for watching. Shout me on @BobsyMindless on Twitter if you want to fight about any of this. Follow patreon.com/Diane podcast. Tell your friends. It's a bit long and rambly, but the guy's got good, decent stuff to say. Thanks for watching. More soon. Happy Halloween, because it's October and I might not get any episode out before the end of October because I'm doing something else that Diane folk might like. And that's it. Stay safe. Lots of love. Bye, bye, bye.